Montgomery Community Media presents Small Business Network, brought to you by Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. SBN is also sponsored by M&T Bank and Leadership Montgomery.
Hello and welcome to Montgomery Community Media's Small Business Network. I'm your host, Kelly Leonard. Every month we bring the business community together to network, to collaborate, and to share best practices in an effort to stimulate regional economic development. Thank you for joining us on the live stream as well as here in the television studio. I am beyond words excited today for this conversation. Our topic is actually a seat at the table, and joining me is Michael Leslie Amilcar. And so I want to introduce you to Michael, because I have the pleasure of having known her for just over a year, and it has just been the most magical year ever. Yes. So, Michael is the CEO of Silver Spring-based Cook Ross. Under her leadership, Cook Ross has grown dramatically, building upon a 30-year legacy of organizational transformation work. Wife, mom, entrepreneur, activist, adoptive family advocate, and change agent, Michael hasn't met a challenge she felt could not be solved with the right people working together. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. This has been a long time in the making, so I'm excited to have you here today.
It was about a year ago when we first started having this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's been well worth the wait. But now, for a lot of folks that are tuning in or who are joining us here in the television studio may not be familiar with Cook Ross. So if you wouldn't mind, just share a bit about the company, its work, and then your journey to become the company's CEO.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I am so proud to lead an organization that has as its vision and mission greater equity of opportunity and access for all. So every day we work with clients all over the globe to solve the most critical and complex challenges that they're facing in the areas of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We do this through consulting, strategy, education, workshops, and digital solutions. So as you mentioned, we have just celebrated our 30 years, founded right here in Silver Spring, Maryland. And it has been quite the journey, as you can imagine. The work has changed so much over the years, and there's so much further we have to go. I joined the organization 12 years ago. And it was a privilege to join Howard Ross, our founder, who really had a vision to really do this work through an organizational development lens. And so to see someone who was thinking about it from a systems base and real change and transformation happening was a real privilege and pleasure. I joined starting off as sales and marketing. It's an interesting story that I think what it was that I saw was the wonderful content and the way of being that this work was being done within. Surprising to say, we're a diversity company and we're actually diverse as an organization. But you'll find that that's not often the case. Right. And so it was a dream that we both had along with Leslie Ellen Traub, a consultant herself and Howard's wife, to really say, what could we do beyond the hands, hearts, and minds of ourselves to take this forward? So we began a journey. I can't say that I knew that I would actually be the CEO, and oftentimes I'm often surprised that I'm in this seat, because it's really the work that really drives me. And so when we began scaling and bringing this work to so many more organizations, I became a partner in the organization. So when I joined, I was about the 4th employee, and then now we're 40 employees. So it was a conversation of partnership. I didn't really even know what that meant. It was just a part of building. I knew I was an entrepreneur. I actually thought being an entrepreneur meant that I actually had to start it myself. And so when I would have these conversations with them, and I'd say, one day I'm going to leave, start my own business. I said, you could stay here and continue this journey. And it was a real aha. And so it's just a real awareness that I think some people think being an entrepreneur always has to mean that you start it yourself, but you can actually take someone else's vision and business and take it forward. And so that just was all last year, and it was an amazing journey. And I remember the words that Howard said to me, which is, he always says this when asked, why did you make Michael partner? And he says, because she was partner before she became partner. He saw my heart and mission and passion for this work. You also heard that I'm an adoption advocate.
Yeah.
And so I am a mother to 2 children who were not born of me. So I know how to love something that I didn't create and to take it forward. As long as you have shared values and vision, I think we both aligned around that. And here we are, taking ourselves into the next 30 plus years.
Nice, awesome.
Sure.
So one of the things that you said is it's the work that drives you. So when you think about the work that you do, what is it that brings you the greatest amount of satisfaction?
There's so many joyful moments. I think especially in what we're experiencing in the world today, which is so much discord and so much need for courageous conversations across difference, that I think the greatest joy, which I share with people, is really having the honor and the privilege to listen to what customers are calling us about every single day, really deeply committed to making change happen inside of organizations. I think actually that would be surprising to most. What we see on television are the incidents, the egregious incidents, of course, that then go viral or certainly go widespread, and people start to say, see, there's a lot of fear in the world. Yes, there are those acts in the world, but there's so much more that people just aren't aware of, that people really are seeking difference. People are really doing some really extraordinary things, both in corporate America, nonprofit, government agencies, higher education. They are really making workplaces thrive, and that's something that we just don't hear enough about.
Yeah, so true, so true. So our topic today is a seat at the table, and you have your own personal journey around, the seat at the table. And so what does finding a seat mean to you?
So it's a very personal thing for me, as it should be for any leader. I remember I shared my seat at the table story with my team sort of extemporaneously. I wasn't expecting to share it, but it really moved them, and it really reminds us that, as much as we talk about the quantitative data of why this matters, the qualitative is just as important. The stories, the storytelling, and to really listen to what people's stories are. So I always say my story began at 26 years old. I thought I had made it because I had was being promoted to the executive ranks at a television broadcasting network in Burbank, California. And I walked into that room so excited to be a part of the executive team, seeing that conference room table a mile long with the high back chairs, and reaching out for a chair and someone saying, that seat's taken. And then reaching for another, oh, that seat's taken too. And just being confused. And then ultimately, the senior vice president for the network walks in and the room falls to a hush and everyone takes their seats. And there was no seat for me. And I stood there really wanting to disappear in the background, feeling embarrassed, realizing that just in a few moments, I went from excitement to confusion to real shame. And she, a lovely woman who has been a mentor and a sponsor for me, didn't see me at first and was railing about the network ratings the night before. And then she spots me and she's like, what are you doing? And I just didn't even know what to say. And I didn't know the rules of, it was a sort of hazing that was happening, but I wasn't aware. And of course, the impact might not have been great if I hadn't been a person who, her whole life, because of my identity, had felt like there was something wrong with me being in the room. And so, anyway, afterwards, she pulled me into her office, and she says, with all of the, I'm sure, compassion that she could bring, and that's not a word that would have been often used for her, but she sternly said, don't you ever let anyone do that to you again. Don't ever. You earned that seat. You deserve to be here. And so that really worked for me. But I think the lesson that I learned in that is that might not work for everyone as well. Just get in there, And so, one, I know that feeling of feeling like I didn't belong, even when I felt like I had earned it. And so I'm so conscious of who's not at the table, and also even when the voices, when the person is there, that they may not have a voice. And so how can we help to draw that out, to prompt the quieter voices and to amplify? So when they do say something, let's just look at what Anna or Mark just said and just really amplify it.
Wow. And so as we fast forward to today a bit, I'm sure there's been other personal hurdles and things that you've had to overcome as you now are kind of at the head of the table, although you're so humble and it's no one would
the
ever.
The reluctant CEO.
Right,
yes.
exactly.
Totally.
But I mean, it is what it is. You're the CEO.
Yes.
And so what are some of those other personal hurdles that you faced along the way that brought you to this time and space that you're in now?
So I'm such a builder. That's what I love to do. I was so happy being the second, the right hand. I had been that for my whole career. So when it was time for me to step forward, I was like, but does this have to be me? I actually want to say that there was some inner work that I needed to do on myself, because when I looked around, I didn't have the experience of seeing a lot of Black women CEOs. And so there was that I had to think about and address. I remember I was talking with one of our principal consultants and I said, well, maybe if we call it something different. And so I was trying to come up with these fancy names, you know how they do now.
Right, yes.
She says, no, we're going to call you CEO. You're going to be the CEO. But I think what I've learned, and actually some really wise counsel, that I can make it what I want it to be. I am me as an authentic CEO, so I'm not performing. I am going to be the CEO that Michael Leslie can bring forth. And guess what? It's enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So talk about some of the inner work, because I'm sure some people are curious as to, okay, what does that look like, practically speaking? What are some of the things that I should be doing to work on myself as I prepare to progress these different stages in life?
It's actually one of the things that we talk to our clients about a lot, is that it is so important to do our own work as we are talking about taking others where we want them to go. So people will say, well, I don't have bias, or I have no issues here. It's like, why don't you go and spend some time with your family and you'll start to see the things and the reactions that might rise up, because I think that is also often a testament when you get around people who really know you. And so I think for me, that my inner work started with, obviously our founder Howard was a proponent of it, still is. And so this is, whether it's leadership sessions or certainly even spiritual sessions, whatever that might look like for people. There's wonderful landmark education is something that I participated in, which was extraordinary for me. Mentoring, coaching, certainly, and always continuing to ask myself where I was triggered. One of the biggest growth areas that I had to do is that about 8 years in, I realized that socially, when I would have events at my home and I looked around, it was largely 100% African American in my home. And I thought to myself, how can I say that I'm a diversity leader? But yet in my social hour it doesn't look that diverse. And so I was making up excuses and stories and saying, well, I don't want to invite this person or that person because maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable. And that was just not true. And so I said, well, I'm going to lean into who I am and just invite everyone. And I have to tell you now, as you know, the events at our home are the most diverse. And it is extraordinary how many of our guests come up to us and say that there are very few times where they go somewhere socially where they can see the full spectrum. And I'm not just talking about racially and culturally, through sexual orientation, certainly gender, age, it's language, and it's beautiful to see. Yeah, and I think it's the actual gift. People say, I've always met someone new.
Yeah. And it's so true. I mean, we do have our own biases, and I think for so long we've been taught that that's kind of like, oh, that's a bad thing. But it's like, okay,
that's right.
We have to acknowledge and then deal with it. How do we then work through the fact that, and recognize that we have a bias, but then how do we work through that to then just be supportive of all the people that we come across with in our lives?
I think if we recognize that to be biased is to be human, and that is a natural state, and that our brain, just in order for our brain to function efficiently, then we can set aside the isms and the should'ves. And there's a spectrum. There's so much about this world that tries to put things in the binary. I certainly experienced that growing up because my mother is Mexican and my father is Black. I identify as a Black woman because that is my experience. But I remember that world of, you have to say you're something, so as to make it easier for people. And it was fine. And I just think about how the world is so much more complex, and I wish that we could appreciate the complexity that each person brings.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now that you've found your seat at the table and you're building tables,
I'm building tables.
Do you find that you have a personal responsibility to ensure that everyone, or that you're just being more conscious about bringing people along in that journey?
Yes, absolutely. I think that one is to recognize, the biggest recognition that I've had is that sometimes we have to redesign the table. That just bringing someone in the room, but if the room isn't designed for them at all, is not actually going to allow more diversity or access and voice. And so just really thinking about the ways that it could be different in that way. And also, everyone wants to play a different role when they have a seat at the table. Not everyone wants the loudest voice. And so to just really respect that. And so to not want it for them, to really find out, what it is that they want and to support them in the way. And actually, when we talk about this work, I think that some of the work that we, veterans, and I am calling myself a veteran, by the way, even though the older veterans will say, oh, you're just a youngin'. But really, that I think what we can learn on this journey is that so much of the way we did it before was do it the way that I do it. Watch me and do it this way. And I think what we learned from Our Lives Matter movement, right, these young students were able to bring together in mass right here to talk about gun control in this nation's capital in a way that was pretty extraordinary. And I think what we saw in that example is they led and sort of the adults supported. And so for us to think about how can we do more hand on the back as opposed to stand behind me, because I think if they always are standing behind and then 20 years later you move out the way, there's not a lot of newness of ideology and thinking that's coming forward.
So let's talk more about this, the practicality. Like, let's say you've got someone who's listening in and they're a leader and they're trying to figure out practically what's one thing that I can do to support and give other leaders or other people who are coming up through the ranks, I guess, their place at the table. What's one practical piece of advice that you might be able to give them in order to be more conscious of their role or their responsibility to make space at that table?
So to me, the first step of having a seat at the table or bringing someone to a larger table is to start at a small table. Take someone to lunch, have coffee with them, and as the leader, listen to who they are, as opposed to sort of talking about what it is that's up for you. Find out what really motivates them, find out what really inspires them, find out what they're thinking about next, and then build that trust relationship in that way. So that you can, and you'd be surprised, people lead people who they don't even know, and it's extraordinary. What can happen if there is a true connection.
Okay, now, and I'm going to invite you all up as you're asking Michael some more questions, but if you have a question, please feel free to make your way to the microphone in these next couple of moments. So one of the things that let's twist the story a little. Now, knowing what you know now, if you had to give advice to your younger self, because of course right now we've sort of focused on, okay, as a leader, what are you practically doing to make space at this table or to create opportunity? But what would you tell younger people, or a person who simply doesn't have or feels like they don't have a seat at the table? What advice would you give to them in order to make that transition to have a space?
I think that what I wish I had known earlier was that my mentors and sponsors didn't all have to look like me. That in fact, having a diverse spectrum of mentors and sponsors, and often as a person of color, actually seeking out a white woman or a white male who has a whole different social network, sometimes a whole different professional network, can actually do more to reflect and to advance and to make a connection that I never would have been able to make. I found that out a little late. It's fine.
It's all good.
It's good.
Better late than never,
That's right.
Yes. First question?
Hi, I'm Sylvia Henderson. Mind Team Solutions is the company. Something you said about doing everything or thinking you have to do everything. As solo business owners, we claim CEO as Chief Everything Officer.
That's right.
What maybe one question did you ask yourself, or one action did you take for your inner work that you can give us advice on to do to help solo business owners move to becoming true CEOs and do only the things that true CEOs need to do, even in our own businesses?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I've had to ask myself that along several stages of the journey. So one piece of inner work is really to get clear about what your strengths are and what your strengths are not. And certainly I started my career at NBC, and at that time it was led by Jack Welch, a GE who always had the famous line to say, I don't have to know the answer, I just need to find the person who has the answer. And so that, philosophy of working with people doesn't have to be hiring, because sometimes you don't have the ability to hire. But if you know that there's an area of weakness that you have, to really partner. Partnerships are so important. And to be able to convene with people, whether through a mastermind group or the like, to be able to work on the things that we know. So you have to do some real truth telling to yourself about what you know you're great at and what you may not be. Not to always, of course, we should always be working towards greater strength, but to really think, and that there's so much more joy also in having the inclusive minds coming together to work out a problem. You're welcome.
So let's rewind a little bit to one of the things that you said around advice that you would give to your younger self, and this whole notion of your mentors or sponsors don't have to look like you. And I think that the challenge is that oftentimes we gravitate towards what we're familiar to, right? And so what strategy or what guidance would you give to someone who's like, okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying in terms of seeking out those people who perhaps are unlike me, but how do people get comfortable? Because I think it all comes down to like trust oftentimes. Like if I don't trust a person, or if I'm unfamiliar with them, their journey, their story. So how would we go about sort of reducing or eliminating those barriers or building trust in those spaces with people who perhaps we don't feel like we have anything in common with?
Yeah, I think you start by watching and looking at the scene. It could be in your own business or in your own company or at networking events. You can see people who seem open and warm and receptive to certain things. Start small. We talked about the leader inviting someone out to breakfast, lunch, or coffee. But to do the same, to say, could I have coffee with you? And to really seek it is to not take that opportunity to then make an ask, because there shouldn't, to me, be an ask at that very first meeting. It is to say, I simply want to learn. I simply want to find out if there's something I can do for you. I've always been, that always takes me aback when someone says, I just want to know how I can help you further. It's like, wow, I want to give back. So I think that that's where it is. And also, you can start with if you have a direct manager or several leaders in the organization. To me, I've always just been prepared. There's nothing wrong with that, actually having your question written out, telling a person I don't want to take up too much time, so saying can I have 15 minutes as opposed to just can I have some time, really anchors and allows somebody to really give impact in a very small way. And if you don't feel it, move on. I mean, there are so many others.
Absolutely. Next question?
Michael, when your team goes into organizations, is there a consistent blind spot that you're seeing across the board that you guys know, like, hey, this is the first area we need to look for or look at? And if so, what is it?
So yes, so one of the things that we notice is that a lot of people tend to think that education, diversity workshops, or diversity training is going to be the answer. And so you've seen the articles, diversity training doesn't work. We love to walk into rooms and say, guess what? Diversity training doesn't work. We know. But the truth is that diversity training alone doesn't work. And so if you're not addressing some of the organizational biases, system structures that are in place that actually inhibit growth, development, and advancement for all, then just putting people through a training or workshop isn't going to be the sole answer. And so it's okay to start there, and often it's an appropriate place to start, as long as we're talking about what is the holistic that we're going to be going in from a system space to deal with. And so it may be a blind spot, but organizations are ready for it. And are so open to having that conversation. They just don't have appropriate partners at times to help them build an appropriate strategy that can help it from a change management perspective.
And do you mainly see that at the top levels or mid-level, lower level?
We always say it's the leaders that are the ones that largely have the impact on what the culture of an organization is. We certainly do work with all levels of an organization, including individual contributors. But I do believe that people who lead have the enormous impact in an organization, and that's where we should start.
Awesome, thank you.
Next question.
Thank you very much for your talk. It very much resonates with me. My name is Sarita Arbel, and I'm the Executive Director for BNI. It's a networking organization. I would love to hear more about your organization and to learn more what it is that you do exactly and how you can support the community, because I absolutely believe that diversity is very important and would love to know more.
Sure. So that's a big question. We do so much, but I can just share a little bit more about how it works. So organizations, we've been doing this for 30 years. We started off largely in healthcare. And has since grown from there, because if you walk into any healthcare setting, it's immediate diversity right when you walk in. Socioeconomic, language, certainly the power dynamics. That's another piece of work we do around power dynamics in an organization, power and privilege, inclusive leadership, and the like. And so that's one pathway. Another one is we do consulting, assessment, and strategy work with organizations. That is what I just said to the previous person, to just actually sit down and where is the vision of what it is that you want to create? What is the idealized workplace, and where are we now? And so that involves doing an assessment. Usually organizations, depending on their size, already have a lot of data. They do engagement surveys. They have a lot of information around attrition. So we look at the data, do analysis there, and then put together a plan, a learning path, if you will, so that they can have and achieve the outcomes that they're seeking. We do a lot of workshops and training. This is not to minimize the importance of that. It just can't be the solo course. And so whether it's around bias, a lot of organizations, you hear it on the news. When I joined Cook Ross, nobody was saying bias in the workplace. It was Howard Ross who began to first talk about bias as it relates to the workplace. Obviously, unconscious bias is not a new term. It's a long-standing term for psychology, and it was just relating it to what's happening in an organization. So we do a lot of that. I think the difference is are you doing just awareness? Or are you doing skill building? And what we're focusing on is skill building. So how can I see bias in action and mitigate it in the moment? As opposed to, it's great to just have a keynote about what is bias, but if people are left with not the tools to know what to do with it afterwards, it's a great speech, but it doesn't actually play out in terms of change behavior inside of an organization. And then there's products that we're developing. I know we said we're only 40 people, right? This sounds like a lot that we're doing. We do have
it's a mighty
group. We do have an extensive consultant contract partners that we work with around the country and around the globe. And so I'm always saying, if you know people who are interested in this work, who are practitioners themselves, we believe in a network so that we can't do the work all ourselves. And so we're always looking for great people. I'm privileged to say that there's a few of you in the room here today, and we share with each other because we don't have all the answers. If we did, and we don't promise our clients to have all the answers, we're going to be partnered together to attempt to address the issues that are germane to your organization.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Michael, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for
happy to be
just letting us glimpse into the window of the journey that you took.
Yes.
To claim your seat at the table. Hopefully this was inspiring to those that were listening online as well as here in the television studio. So as we conclude this episode, again, I want to thank you, Michael. Thank those of you that are online joining us via the live stream, as well as everyone that's here in the television studio. Again, my name is Kelly Leonard, and on behalf of Montgomery Community Media, our partners and our sponsors, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Have an amazing day.